You're listening to Tara Lynn's A Geek Saga podcast. This episode features audio from a discussion panel that was recorded at DragonCon 2018. Okay, hi everybody. This is the High Fantasy Sons of the Dragon panel. We are going to be talking about the Sons of the Dragon novella that was published in Book of Swords, what was it, last year? Last October, maybe, something like that. And also just general, Targaryen line of succession fun. So, my name is Tara. I am the moderator today. I can be found across the web at A Geek Saga. I'm an author. I've got 2 books out under the pen name T.L. Walker, and I run Ice and Fire Con, which is Game of Thrones Song of Ice and Fire convention. We were the first ever Game of Thrones convention in the U.S. way back in 2013, and we're going to be having our seventh convention in end of April 2019. So we're going big too. We're going to have like a theme of the 7 and everything. Pretty excited. And my fellow panelists are...
Hey, I'm Jennifer Liang, and I am the track director for High Fantasy at DragonCon.
And I'm Andrew Tedeschi. I'm co-host of the Stats Check podcast, and I'm a volunteer at Ice and Fire Con, and I've attended, I think this has been my 4th year now, so really love it and would encourage anybody who loves Ice and Fire to attend.
So, I'm going to hope that y'all have read Sons of the Dragon, but if you haven't, it's not really spoilery stuff because, a lot of this information was vaguely out there on the Song of Ice and Fire wiki or Westeros forums, and George had certainly talked about it quite a bit. But the Sons of the Dragon, it begins kind of at the end of Aegon the Conqueror's life, and it's basically about the succession kind of soon after that. Visenya is still alive for most of the novella and causing some ruckuses with her son Maegor the Cruel. So the way I usually run these things will kind of get the conversation started, but then hopefully up to you guys to keep it going with some good questions and pithy thoughts. Just make sure that is there a mic to pass around or okay. So there are 2 mics, so just raise your hand and one of our lovely volunteers will bring you guys a mic to that way everybody will be able to hear you. I mean, thankfully this room isn't so huge that it would be that big of a problem. But so let's start with you guys. I don't know, what's your favorite thing about this particular novella?
I mean, for me, it's that the High Towers are trouble. I mean, the High Towers are always start trouble. I mean, between, what happened with Cerise and then, in this, pretty much kicking off the kind of feedback again, or the pushback against Targaryens having multiple wives, and then Alicent during the Dance with Dragons just starting a huge, inter-Targaryen war. That was very, very interesting to me. But also seeing sort of the personality differences that sort of play out with the Targaryens, and you kind of see that across time, right? Even going into Dany, even going into, well, now we can say Jon, every Targaryen has a different sort of personality, but there are sort of predispositions to, frankly, cruelty. In some cases, there's on the other side, you'd even say incompetence, or rather just softness. So, I mean, you see that in Aenys, who's the first son, and then Maegor has the obviously the other side. He's the cruel. So that was a really interesting dynamic.
Yeah, I agree with Andrew. A lot of just the details on the Targaryen family, their different personalities, getting some of that stuff fleshed out a little bit more. Also, just seeing just how they play off of each other, because you hear the name Maegor the Cruel, and you're like, oh, that sounds like a really awful guy. But then you start reading more of the details of it, and you're like, oh, yeah, no, he was really awful. It's not just a fun nickname.
But he was effective, right? I mean, he was awful, but the whole issue was he was awful because he had to be, right? Mm-hmm. So, part of the plot, and this is a story, once again, if folks, read through it, was during Aenys' rule, a lot of the lords were just in rebellion. They wanted to try to go back to pre-conquering times, which in their case, they had people who remembered a time before the Targaryens. Mm-hmm. So, when push came to shove, Aenys wasn't able to mobilize quickly enough to put those down. That was completely Maegor going in and quashing all those separate rebellions across the realm.
Yeah, and then causing a few of his own later. So I actually, weirdly enough, I have a new favorite thing about this particular novella, and it's thanks to History of Westeros podcast. I don't know if any of you guys listen to them, but they're great. One of the longer running webcast podcasts for Song of Ice and Fire. And they posted both on Facebook and on Twitter this little comparison between Maegor and a character who is in the current timeline. Very, very large men who had lots of wives. There was a famous incident with a horse in both cases, and their names rhyme. So, and there's actually a ton of other stuff that Maegor the Cruel and Gregor Clegane have in common. And it's just it was very interesting, like, this has to be on purpose, right? I mean, even down to the fact that they were both injured in combat, where they were fighting for, well, in Maegor's case himself, and Gregor's case for, Cersei, against Tyrion. Boo, I can talk today, really. But they were both injured, grievously, and almost died, or in Gregor's case, probably did die. And honestly, with Maegor, he might have as well, because he was also brought back via possible, likely black magic by Tiana of the Tower, one of his wives, who he later had, I think he had killed. So that's a really neat parallel between, or a lot of really neat parallels between those two characters that I thought was a super interesting thing to I don't know how they even came to that conclusion, but I was like, oh my God, I love this. Now, and you were saying, Andrew was saying, Aenys was kind of weak and slow to action and everything, and Maegor kind of did what he had to do, but Maegor was also not a good person.
Right, I mean, Aenys was just a nice guy TM, he was just super, super, super nice, and, was a kind of pleaser. I mean, almost in the same way we see with a lot of different rulers. Now, some rulers end up being effective working that way. Like later on in World of Ice and Fire, we hear about, and also a little bit in the aftermath here, we hear about Jaehaerys, who was a very kind of calm guy who kind of brought the realm together, not a warlike dude. But Aenys wasn't as effective, and really that's how he was judged.
It's sort of like Aenys was the wrong king for the time. Like you sort of needed another conqueror in that time to keep the realm together, and then later on you could have a nice guy who'd be like, we're just going to grow stuff, and we're going to intermarry our families together and kind of build things up. But you really needed the strong, cruel, I'm going to march my armies across your land and just burn everything down guy to keep everything together, because a lot of empires collapse after the initial conqueror passes away, and so that's you needed somebody like Maegor to hold things together, just to keep it going a little bit longer.
Well, and that's a big plot point for both Aenys and Maegor that then Aenys especially kind of screws up, is that they did they married outside of the Targaryen family. They had no sisters, but with Aenys marrying Valerian, I can never pronounce. It's Valerian.
Yeah.
I always have trouble with that one because it's so close to Valerian.
Yeah.
Valerian.
And they have Valerian blood, which makes it even more complicated.
And then Maegor, of course, marrying a Hightower, and then eventually other people. But so they married outside of the Targaryen family, making these alliances and everything, and also kind of appeasing the people of Westeros who weren't really into the whole incest thing. But then later on, Aenys has a bunch of kids, and by the way, Maegor has none. I find that so cool and interesting, that Aenys, this sickly, kind of weak person, has a crap ton of kids, and then Maegor's over here not able to have any.
Well, he had
3
kids.
wives.
He had, well, there were stillbirths of drastically
Monsters.
Deformed children. But one of them may not have even been his, because they
Right.
What was it? Was it Cerise who was? I can't remember which
Yeah.
one of his wives, her. No, I think it was his other wife, whose name I'm blanking on right now. Who
was the first one? Whoever the first one was, she was the one that he put to death for adultery.
Okay, that's what it was.
Inviting
Okay, it
other
was
people
Cerise.
to
Then.
come in,
Yeah.
hey, everybody,
Yeah. She was.
Yeah.
Her dad was basically pimping her
Or
out,
making
trying
a
to get her
son
to
no
have
matter
kids.
how it happens. get somebody in there.
I mean, but did you see a parallel to Daenerys there with kind of like the children, the deformed children in that case?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
did see that.
The wings and everything,
Yeah.
especially, is like, how does this even happen? They really do have dragon blood in them or
Yeah.
something weird. But yeah, so
It's an awfully specific deformity to happen in this family.
yeah. So Amy's had a bunch of kids, and he didn't he didn't pay attention to the fact, or didn't care that the whole intermarrying within the family was an issue with people, and he married, his daughter and son married each other, and that kind of sparked like a whole bunch of these rebellions that happened during his reign, and and he had given Blackfire to Maegor at the beginning, and they said, we'll rule together, but Visenya was always there in the background, kind of muttering about how her kid was better, and you should be following him. Like, Westeros needs a warrior. I wrote this down because I really liked it. Westeros required a warrior, not a dreamer.
Do you think this is really interesting to me in bringing up Visenya? That made me think a lot about what Visenya's sister-wife relationship was. It seemed like, and there were kind of bits and pieces of World and Ice and Fire and other comments that the wives weren't kind of equal, that Aegon spent more time away from Visenya than with her. So would you all also say that perhaps there was some leftover saltiness from Aegon's lack of preference for?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I definitely felt like she felt like the passed over wife, and that her child was being passed over, even though he was clearly so much better. No, he wasn't.
Does anybody have any questions or anything like that? Like I said, if you do, just raise your hand and someone will bring you a microphone. Otherwise, we will just keep talking.
I was wondering, with the release of Fire and Blood coming later this year, how do you think that this will affect the novella itself, or if you think that they're just going to rewrite, just republish what's been published before? I mean, I was aware of some errors that happened with the release of Book of Swords, Sons of the Dragon, and I know that they're going to fix those, but I was wondering if you think that there might be something else added, or...
From what I heard, the novella is going to kind of be basically the story is going to be in there, possibly even more fleshed out than it already is. That's what I've heard. And I did, I've heard a little bit. I can't remember what exactly the errors were. It may have been continuity, it may have been family tree stuff, but I do know that they put out, I think, a picture of the family tree that's going to be in the book, and there were they put that out, and then I think they even after that had fixes that they had to make to it because of this novella. It's oh, oops, we forgot we did this thing.
And I think the theme you see with the novellas is you're adding incremental detail. So you're probably getting starting with a 30,000 foot view of, okay, this scenario happened at a piece of time, and then, it's like storytelling. The fish gets bigger, right? You start saying, well, Maegor was a bad guy. Okay, well, how bad was he? Come on, we got Ramsay here. We got, people getting castrated. So, what's up? So, you're building on that detail. You're fleshing out that story till it becomes a story unto itself. It's not just a blurb in World of Ice and Fire. It's a story that you can follow that has a narrative.
Anybody? No? Okay, because I'll keep talking. Okay. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about were the rebellions that happened during first Amy's rule, and then his name is so rough, George. First during Amy's rule, and then later during Maegor's. They were completely different types of rebellions. Amy's, like we had mentioned, was trouble with a bunch of the lords. There was Harren the Red at Harrenhal, and one of the Aarons in the Vale who called himself, he said, I'm king of the Vale now. What are you going to do about it?
Come at me, bro.
And then there was this Vulture King guy in Dorne who was causing a bunch of trouble and possibly even being fed people and money and whatever by the princess of Dorne at the time. She kept saying, "Oh no, I want him gone too. I want him gone too." But it pretty much explicitly states that everybody figured she was behind it in a way.
And an important fact, and I think this is something that we don't pick up because in the you have to really pay attention, is that Dorne is still independent at this time. they hadn't been really brought into the realm yet. So that's how that scenario is able to kind of escalate and become something bigger than it is, because they still have their own sovereignty.
And so Aenys is sitting around watching all these lords like rebel, and he's like hemming and hawing, and he keeps saying he's going to do something, and then he changes his mind and doesn't. And then Maegor literally rides in on the back of a dragon, it being Balerion, that dragon being Balerion. He kept saying, I'm not claiming a dragon until I can have this particular dragon. And so he ends up claiming Balerion, and he comes in and he saves the day for his brother. Again, like that's that whole Westeros needs a warrior, not a dreamer, but really they just need somebody who's going to take action. So he comes in and he saves his brother's ass, and but then Aenys is still king, and Visenya is still whispering in the background, and it was a while between when Maegor helped Aenys and when he finally just claimed the crown for himself. So I don't know. What do you like? How do you guys feel about the Balerion thing? About the rebellion?
Yeah, I think it was pretty obvious when he said he wasn't claiming a dragon that he was waiting for Balerion to become available, and so it was not shocking when he rode in on Balerion. But also, I felt like that was very fitting because he thinks of himself as the true heir of Aegon. Like I am Aegon's real son. I'm the one that's really going to do what Aegon did and be the conqueror. And so, yeah, I'm going to wait till I can have my daddy's dragon.
Yeah, and I like the whole scene where, when he's exiling him, he's like, okay, well give me Blackfire. And he's like, okay, you can take Blackfire from me. Like, once again, come at me, same attitude. That he follows through when he would just summarily execute people who defied him when he became king. And that was pretty consistent with him.
Yeah, I mean, and he was Maegor's hand. Like he was hand of the king at one point,
right.
And that it's like, oh, things are going okay. Maegor saved Aenys' butt from these rebellious lords, and then he became hand of the king, which I don't really know that Maegor had
the skills. For
the skills to be hand of the king, but whatever, sure.
But it's a nice alternate fantasy where you think like, oh, what if these two could have worked together, and what could they have done together if they hadn't been so busy fighting each other?
Or maybe if like Aegon had spent 10 more minutes in Visenya's bedroom or something like that. I mean, if that's what it boiled down to, is like he wouldn't cuddle. You know what I mean?
But then, unfortunately for Aenys, Maegor, was childless, and he was pissed about that. So he went and got a second wife, and that caused a whole other all these other issues because the faith, the High Septon, and everyone disagreed with it. They were not cool with the incest, but they also really weren't cool with the multiple wives, and even though Maegor kind of set Ceres Hightower aside, there's no divorce in Westeros, so it was he's still married to her, and now he's got a second wife, and that's that caused this whole kind of second round of issues, this time with the faith.
Do you think that, and one thing for me, that kind of pops out, because amongst the sex position and other things we see that are relatively liberal in Westeros, and like Dornish practices that are pretty liberal, this kind of highlights how conservative Westeros can be in terms of their religious practices, which I kind of try to project into the current date, right? And the things that are going on with Cersei and, messing with the faith and how that's taken seriously. Obviously, since the faith militant is once again cropping up, it's a very good highlight to how serious of an issue this was at a certain point, where, people were so fixed on their dogma just regarding marriage that they were willing to die, willing to literally have bounties placed on their head, and yet still fight back and try to persevere with this particular doctrine of the faith.
Well, I think part of that ties into this is a real world historic parallel where the ruler of a kingdom was also seen as sort of a spiritual leader, anointed by God, supposed to be God's representative on earth. And so if you're not following traditional morals as set down by the church, you're not condemning just yourself, but you're condemning the entire kingdom to hell. And so you really don't want that to happen if you can avoid that. It's kind of nice not to go to hell. But yeah, so you kind of see that playing out because George Martin draws more from historic sources than from mythological sources. And And so he's looking for a way to draw that parallel between like, hey, like, you know, this whole kingdom's going to go to hell in a handbasket because the king is not following what we consider to be moral. So we are duty bound to try to take care of this and try to get somebody more morally acceptable on the throne.
Yeah, and I mean the whole like in the current timeline, the faith militant coming back, it happens very quickly. But in in this particular, in Sons of the Dragon, it's a very like the faith militant exists, but it's the amount that the faith that the Church of the Seven is involved kind of just grows gradually throughout Aenys and Maegor's life. They weren't happy with the way things were with the Targaryens, but then these two sons married outside the family, and they think everything's kind of going okay for a little bit, and then Maegor takes his second wife, and they get a little bit more angry, and they start speaking up a little bit more. And then, as I mentioned earlier, Aenys decided to marry his son Aegon to his daughter Rhaena, and that is when it kind of it broke, the faith. They were like, no, we can't go back to this. And unfortunately, like that. With Maegor already being problematic, even though Aenys died kind of soon after he married his son and his daughter, Maegor being king wasn't really much better because, in their minds, and especially when he had been sent away after he married his second wife, Alice Haraway. He had been sent away, like banished, and he was gone for 5 years, and he came back, to claim the crown when his brother died.
And he had a choice. Amy said, look, all you've got to do is like put her, say you're not really married to the Haraway, and you can stay. And he goes, no, I'm gonna go with her and go into exile. So he literally, prioritized himself and his own interests over the entire realm at that point.
But also, because one of the things you see, the Targaryens always play by their own rules. Like they're very much in Westeros, but not of Westeros. They kept their bloodlines very pure by intermarrying with each other. They've always followed their own rules, and so you kind of see like this is a point generationally where they have to decide: are we going to be a Westerosi family, or are we going to be a Valyrian family, and which set of morals and culture are we going to follow? And they're very explicitly choosing, no, we're Valyrian, we're the Sons of the Dragon, we're going to do whatever we want to do, and we're going to follow these rules that are handed down in our family for all these generations from a kingdom that doesn't even exist anymore. We're going to rule Westeros, but we're going to do it as Valyrians.
I mean, and they kind of can because they have dragons.
Yeah, because they have dragons, they can get away with that.
And they became correct me if I'm wrong, I do remember this, the title, the royal title, which, if you remember from the scene, even from the TV show, how long the actual royal title is for, the ultimate crown. But I think the Defender of the Seven, or the Protector of the Seven, that came after this whole incident, right? That was added.
It might have, yeah. That might be. You might know more about that than I do.
Yeah, I think that this novella specifically mentions that whole title, as a defender of the faith, came because they were seen as antithetical to the faith. So they had to go and promise and make these concessions after this whole ordeal. I think both with Aenys and finishing up with Maegor, that no, we are going to preserve and protect the faith.
Well, there's no better way of protecting the faith than executing a high septon or two. So
and appointing your own. That's very historical. If you look at the popes, in medieval times, that happened all the time.
Well, I mean, and I mean, Maegor, he eradicates the faith militant. They don't exist up until this point in the current timeline where Cersei kind of allows them to come back because of Maegor the Cruel. Like he went to war with them and he won. And they had a lot of people, and they had a lot of support. They had a lot of support from the small folk and everything, but Maegor had a dragon.
Right. They could have been a longer term problem if it wasn't stamped out the way he stamped them out. I mean, they could have run longer term rebellions and had, at the end they were literally kidnapping folks like the Brotherhood Without Banners is doing right now, just kidnapping Freys. They were doing the exact same thing with people who were associated with that regime and kind of supporting Maegor's regime.
Yeah.
Well, that also ties back to the historical parallels when England was transitioning from being a mostly Catholic country to mostly Protestant country. It happened because King Henry VIII wanted to marry somebody else, and Pope wouldn't give him a divorce, so he made his own religion, got rid of the wife. And, there was the whole thing with all of his wives. But then there were several generations going back and forth where first he had a Protestant son on the throne, and so the kingdom stayed Protestant. Then he had a Catholic daughter, and she tried to take everything back Catholic. Then there was another Protestant daughter, Elizabeth I, and Elizabeth I is the one who really cemented Protestantism in that country. But it was several generations of fire and blood and rebellions and intrigues. The Mary Queen of Scots ended up being executed because she was looked at as a Catholic pretender to the English throne. And so because it was taken care of very quickly with dragons, they ended their religious conflict much more quickly in Westeros than England did. If only King Henry VIII had dragons, who knows what he would have done.
He probably would have had 3 wives at once, I think. He would have.
Yeah.
Nobody would
There
have
would have
told
been
him
no
otherwise.
divorcing ever again for him.
So Maegor, like he eradicated the faith militant, and then he also, both Amy's and Maegor's reigns were just plagued by not just rebellions, but just like, just constant like fighting. I don't even know if you can really call it war, because they weren't necessarily calling up a whole ton of banners or anything, but he fought his nephew as well, and Aegon and his I'm pretty sure his dragon Quicksilver both died on the battlefield.
Yes.
Quicksilver like had his wing ripped off by
Yeah.
Balerion. Like, rough, guys. So Maegor was good at this. He was good at winning these little kind of mini skirmish war things. I hesitate to call it war, because like I said, they're not calling up a ton of banners. This isn't War of the Five Kings type situation.
Right.
This is just people.
It's unrest.
Yeah, like really bad unrest.
Although
but-
it is in the number of thousands. I mean, and not once again, without dragons, that completely changes the
Exactly.
game. If you're able to just go onto a field, and I think there was a situation in one of the rebellions where it was raining, and Balerion was still using his fire, and still managed to kill thousands even while it was raining. I mean, that completely changes the game if you're thinking about the scales of these battles, which are usually between 5,000 to 10,000 against kind of equal forces.
The other thing is, while all of this is going on, somehow Maegor still managed to complete the Red Keep. And then after he kind of got rid of the Faith Militant and everything, he created the Dragon Pit, where their little, I can't remember what the building was called that they
It
like.
was a sept.
It was a sept, but a sept of remembrance. Thank you. So that was torn down, and he created the Dragon Pit in its place.
And think about how cruel that was, because that was after he, he tore down the sept. So I mean, in that he's given the finger to the faith, and on top of that, he just went and executed all of the builders. He said, "Oh, we're gonna throw a party. Yeah, come. Parties are great. Westeros loves parties." And slaughtered them all, and I think buried them underneath the Red Keep.
Yep. Yeah.
So I mean, they had to bring in slaves and other folks, from abroad to build the Dragon Pit.
I think they did use a lot of prisoners as well. Yeah. So that which is kind of like this is like real life, like using prisoners to do jobs like I don't know, like they did in California with fighting those forest fires. We'll get you a mic. Hold on one sec.
Actually, I probably don't need it. One of the things that I liked about this novella is that it keeps the Targaryens as the villains, while it keeps us reminded that everywhere else in the realms about this same time, there's other things happening. Like, if you go to the north, right about this same time, the two Brandon Starks that are born together in the north both claim to be the heir of Brandon Stark. And that's where you get the Starks of Winterfell and the Starks of Harhold. That's a fight happening right about the same time as the Blackfire Rebellion. In the south, that's when you see the fight between the young girl that would later become the Queen of Thorns and House Forrester over their right to claim the rose, right? She married the rightful heir, and they were unwilling to pass it down. all of this is happening simultaneously with Blackfire Rebellion. It's a completely different storyline, told in a completely different area of the world, and it's all just people infighting in the Seven Kingdoms, in the individual areas. But what we're reading is brother fighting brother centrally in the middle of the world, with the villains as George R. R. Martin wants to set them. So there's other infighting happening everywhere else. Everybody else you're watching on the screen is all fighting each other during this time as well. And what we get is Targaryen versus Targaryen and the Sea of Blood.
Well, I think that kind of harkens back to kind of what I said earlier. Martin really does like weave similar stories and references into these things. The Maegor and Gregor similarities. Like one of the things that I had written down was I choose to believe are like homages that he like kind of peppers throughout these other stories. In this particular one, Davos Baratheon likens his father's collection of severed hands and feet to a string of onions.
Yeah.
And also even like there's a Tarly that's his nickname is Savage Sam Tarly, which kind of obviously brings to mind Sam the Slayer, and I think like you could probably possibly make an argument for it being lazy writing, but I really think in Martin's case it's all very much on purpose, and it's kind of one of the things I enjoy most about the way he writes.
And I always bring back, and Jen mentioned this, is that he's such a fan of history, and if you look at a lot of different regimes, I mean, recently I think about like Yugoslavia, what brought that whole nation together was Tito, right? You had one strong central leader, but then when that goes away, it's like, oh, we all hate Tito, he's a horrible guy, we're all unified in our distaste for this guy. But afterwards, it's like, okay, wait.
Actually, I hate you too.
Yeah,
so.
exactly. We're gonna break this up. Because that's the way it was before, for hundreds and thousands of years.
Yeah, the PR against the guy was really strong.
And also history repeats itself.
Yeah.
Right.
Sadly, but very
We're not
truthfully.
good at learning from mistakes.
Yes, go ahead. They're discussing. I think just talk very loudly.
I was gonna ask you what one of your favorite moments in the novella was, but before that, I wanted to share one of my favorite moments. And I just love in the novella when Maegor lands in King's Landing and he has no supporters there. So they declare the faith thinks they have him, and so they declare Trial 7 because they think no one's gonna fight for Maegor.
Yeah.
So he just randomly asks everyone who's gonna fight for him, and then I don't know, is there any kids in? No, right? So, and then this governor Dick Bean. He stands up and he's like, I was born a king's man, I mean to die one. And he incites all the others to actually step up, all the real knights to step up and fight for Maegor. So I was wondering what some of your favorite moments in the novella.
I just got a chill hearing that because that was my favorite moment. The whole thing was
Yeah.
like, look at Dick Bean stepping up over here, and you guys aren't going to step up. And then, of course, as soon as he does that, everybody else steps up. And then coming out of that scene, he barely survives. So you always think about the what-if scenario, right? I mean, some people write a lot of fan fiction. It's like, what if the guy just swung a little harder and took him out? That would have changed history completely. If he had died in that melee instead of going through. And it would have, shown he wasn't, favored by the Seven. He had that sort of cover, for a little while as saying, hey, I won this trial by the Seven. So what's up, bro? But...
Yeah, so what you said was my favorite spot as well. That scene felt very cinematic to me. It was very easy to picture the inevitable HBO adaptation of it. It was really very well written. It's a scene that I would love to see in film someday. But also I enjoyed the aftermath when the Faith of Seven is like, oh, so he did win our trial of 7, but we still think he's a jerk. He won, but we really wish he hadn't. What do you do about this? And just kind of seeing that play out was interesting to me.
Yeah, that probably is the best scene. I mean, and here's the thing. This is a yes.
Except for maybe his death. Because I loved Clue when I was a kid. And that really is like a whodunit, because he's like, killed in a way in which you don't know exactly how he died, but it's kind of clear that it would have been really hard to kill yourself like that. You would have had to think about it before you did it. And most people committing suicide wouldn't choose to do it in a super painful way on a spiky chair. So
I mean, it's obvious the Iron Throne killed him.
Yes.
Clearly.
The Iron Throne rejects people who aren't worthy of it. So once he wasn't worthy anymore, the Iron Throne somehow.
Well, I mean, Yeah, it's actually a living being the Iron Throne. But no, for real though, when it was made, like, you got to imagine that there's not just swords in that chair. Like there's got to be like some like actual magic in it, and especially considering Maegor dies on it the way he does, and then later, of course, when Mad King Aerys is sitting on the throne, you know, we hear about how he was constantly cutting himself on it and everything.
Rhaenyra too, during the Dance of Dragons.
Yeah, she's always cutting herself on it, and that's the sign that she's not fit for the throne. Is the throne keeps rejecting her by cutting her.
Which you can't quite imagine. Like I do love the design of the throne that HBO created, but you can't really imagine this stuff happening on that particular one. So if you've not seen the art that Martin said, yes, this is like how the throne would look. It's like huge. It's just this tower almost of swords and everything. They're all sticking out and everything. So I don't even know how anybody gets up there.
And it's
honestly.
like meandering. It's sort of like a winding path.
I mean, there's supposed to be what, like 1,000 swords in there or something?
Swords, yeah.
Not 50 HBO. I really there's a lot of problems I have with the show, but like I do like the design of the throne. It's very nice and clean.
And it's symmetrical, and it looks like you could actually sit in it.
Is the throne in here right now?
The throne is over there.
Oh, okay, yes.
It's available for photo ops.
Yes. Just please be
So
gentle with it.
Daenerys needs to get in it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
please be gentle with the throne because we need it for Saturday or tomorrow night. Gosh, that's hard. Okay.
Already,
Yeah. So yeah. That the scene with Dick Bean is good. His death is good. I mean, honestly, my whole thing is like I've read this novella I think 3 times now, and my whole thing is like I know that this is about Maegor, but like it's also about Amy's some too, and like you learn a little bit about his kids, particularly his oldest kids. Like Rhaena eventually is forced to marry Maegor, you know, because Aegon is dead and he's still not had any kids, and it's like, yeah, I'll marry my niece. It's cool, right? Like she might give me some kids. She's already had kids, and also like maybe I can get that, you know, this kind of merge the lines or whatever. It doesn't work out that way, obviously. But like I always read it hoping that I'm gonna learn more about Jaehaerys, you know, and then at the end it's like you get that little like, oh, but that's another tale for another time. It's like, dang it, but I want to know more about him.
But that's another novella that probably will come in the future, you know, if he's.
Or well, I mean, hopefully we'll get a whole crap ton of this information in you know, Fire and Blood. Which and the other thing, you know, while it will almost certainly flesh out Maegor's story, we did get a lot of Targaryen information in World of Ice and Fire. I don't know if everybody in here read through the entire book, but I mean, probably like almost a third of it is straight up just Targaryen like history. But you know, and to be honest, I'm not sure, and Andrew, Jen, you guys may know this. What's the style of Fire and Blood? Like, is it going to be told to us like a Septon is writing it, like this novella was, or?
I have no idea.
It's an Archmaester. It's an Archmaester that writes it.
Yeah.
Okay, it is. Okay.
I mean, I
That
guess
makes
the
sense.
premise is like there's some Archmaester who's like, oh, look what I found in this chest.
Actually, in the World of Ice and Fire, the Archmaester who writes it is Jandel, who is represented by
Elio, yeah.
Yeah.
But he's quoting Gildane.
Gildane.
Yes, that's what it is. Okay.
Gildane
Yeah.
is George R. R. Martin who writes Fire and Blood.
I wasn't for some reason. I haven't, to be honest, I haven't like looked that much into Fire and Blood because I just kind of want to be. I don't know. I want it to be new and fresh to me because it's the first thing we've got, a first real thing we've gotten in a while. I mean, basically since World of Ice and Fire, you know, and it's probably the thing we're gonna get, the only thing we're gonna get for a while. So yeah, I'm trying to stay like kind of spoiler free, and I you know, I knew that obviously, you know, we've had the mentions of like these histories that were written by these maesters. Part of me was kind of hoping that it would actually be like a novel. But I guess not. I'm sad now. You've ruined it for me.
Yeah.
Do we have any?
Oh, Rhaena, and Rhaena was interesting. You brought up Rhaena. I did feel like she got her justice in the end, right? Because she ends up riding off, getting the dragon, getting Blackfire, and he's dead. So, I mean, she did kind of, you know, get him in the end.
Yeah.
Even though that whole Black Bride situation was really depressing.
Yeah.
Yeah, if they were going to make an HBO adaptation of this, that would be like the crowning moment of awesome, where like she rides off with the dragon and the sword and like, wow, and the closing credits.
Yeah, poor Rhaena did not have a very easy life. I mean, we don't know for sure that she loved her husband brother. But like I feel like they had a good relationship. You don't
They had
like
a healthier relationship.
yeah, healthy.
Yeah.
If we ignore the fact that they're brother and sister,
Perhaps more consensual than what she had with her uncle.
and you know, and she had her twin daughters with him, and they play a part in her marrying Maegor. Like, people are kind of thinking, oh, she's going to try to find a way to bow out of this, but then Tiana of the Towers shows up, you know, with the daughters that Rhaena had tried to like secret away, and it's like nobody knows how she found them. But you know, other than probably like something black magic, something black magic, you know, but you know, Tiana like kind of forces this to happen, and I mean, thankfully later she gets her due too, because she was not great. There was like that minute where you're thinking, oh, like nobody likes that Tiana exists, nobody likes that Maegor is like married her or whatever, but like him and Alice are real happy about it. So
But you do get that sort of fear of outsiders that comes into play with a lot of different characters that are foreign. You know, in the books there's a lot more characters that are from other places, but even with Varys, who, you know, came from Essos, you know, that's part of the inherent distrust of this guy, you know, that makes him spidery, right? So, I mean, that's something that plays out with Tiana and some of the others that are from abroad as well. And even to an extent, the Targaryens, because they're ultimately foreigners that came to Westeros.
yeah, and I mean, and honestly, like it's kind of what all is going on in Sons of the Dragon is, you know, it kind of is, it's a very strong hint at what we are, you know, what will likely happen when Daenerys, you know, in the books eventually makes her way to Westeros. I mean, obviously we've seen a little bit of that in the show, but I'm just gonna focus on the book portion of it, and yeah, like we can pretty much most likely expect that it's going to be a similar thing where she is, you know, not just fighting against lords who don't want to be under Targaryen rule again, but also possibly even fighting against, you know, the faith. Not just the faith militant, but just the faith in general. Like, they've never really cared for the Targaryens. They had a kind of begrudging, like, acceptance of them because they had to. But yeah, so I definitely think this is a good kind of precursor of like what we're probably going to see when
Yeah,
she
because you can kind of see that in the show, because it's not just, oh, we don't want the Mad King's daughter on the throne, but it's also, she's a foreign queen. She has foreign ways. She's bringing a foreign army with her. She's not one of us. And so we don't really want her on the throne because she's not Westerosi. Wouldn't it be so much better if you had me, Cersei, because I'm so great and I'm one of you and you know me?
Even though they're both in a way more Cersei now, because Daenerys is not a totally known factor yet to all of Westeros, but she's already firing up the faith militants. So by the time Daenerys gets there, they're going to be kind of charged up and ready to go, because they've been dealing with Cersei for the last couple of years.
Any questions before we just keep talking? Just making sure, just checking. Okay. One of the things I thought was kind of funny, and this kind of is bred from, you know, we wait so long between getting new stuff from this world that we kind of tend to pick things apart. But like, when the more times you read these, the more little things you pick up. Like I mentioned earlier, the kind of homages with the Davos Baratheon and Savage Sam, and one of the things that I kind of got a chuckle out of, and hopefully I'm not going to offend anyone here, but there's a Lord Falwell who fights with the Faith. They call him the Fighting Fool, and like I just want that to be a Jerry Falwell reference so bad. And like Martin is he is very like he's political in this, like in ways like that, where here's a little poke,
Loki.
you know, yeah, a little poke, like it you might get it. Maybe it's not a reference, but like it seems kind of like this can't be coincidence that this guy's name is Falwell. He's fighting with the Faith, and his nickname is the Fighting Fool. But did you guys notice anything like that? Like,
I'm trying to think of the random.
So,
No, I mean, other than the names that you pointed out already that are definitely parallels. I mean, Davos was so on the nose for me. I mean, I literally stopped. I was actually listening to it on the first time in audiobook. I paused it and just had a moment to myself on that one. But other than that, it was more, for me, looking at the references that came back. There was a funny one in The Dance with Dragons. Rhaenyra, actually ends up being called or dubbed King Maegor with Teats, which was kind of a later on reference that kind of comes back around. And then, Daemon was also said that he was going to be as cruel as Maegor. So Maegor kind of sets this like gold standard for cruelness throughout Westeros.
So one of the things I noticed was that there was some good symbolism going on with Maegor's keep, with the Red Keep being built, because it's being built as he's building up the kingdom and making a strong foundation for it. But at the end of it, he ends up killing a whole bunch of people and burying them under the foundation. And that's sort of like Westeros. Like Westeros was built into a strong kingdom by what Maegor did, but he did it by killing a whole bunch of people and burying them somewhere, I guess.
Yeah, him, we get that like in brief mentions in the, I think it's in Game of Thrones, like in the first book, that Maegor killed everybody and that nobody really knows all of the secrets. And there's been stuff added to the Red Keep since then.
Well, and that's another parallel to Westeros itself. Nobody really knows all the secrets of Westeros. There's all these intrigues and infighting, and there's, who's Jon Snow's parents and things like that. There's a lot that you don't know because everyone who knew it died.
I mean, and also, like,
cruelly.
is the Red Keep cursed because of what Maegor did,
Yeah, it depends on which, I guess, religious lens you're looking through. I mean, the seven, and that's another panel. We have another panel on that later on magic in Westeros and what's going on. The seven is a very interesting faith, I think, but in that it hasn't shown sort of a manifestation yet, at least as far as I know in the series, versus, R'hllor has shown definite powers there, and definitely the old gods, have the Weirwood internet. So, I mean, that's definitely like a real thing. And Bloodraven, who we've heard about a lot, obviously he's even in the show, but, in the books, and then in World of Ice and Fire, you can see he was actually using those crows to spy on people, clearly. And that's definitely interesting.
Yeah, well, I mean, and I think that, that's possibly even like part of why the Targaryens, like, yes, they're the Targaryens, they have dragons, so they do what they want to do, but also like why should they have any sort of like respect or reverence for this faith that, yeah, it was there before them, but they don't follow it, and it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't manifest itself. So why should I listen to what they want of me? Why shouldn't I murder their militant branch? Like you got to understand kind of a little bit where Maegor's coming from in that respect. Like there's nothing really there to like to respect or want to be part of, honestly.
And to a certain extent, it's like fundamentalism. Like to a certain extent, you can't negotiate with somebody who's purely fundamentalist. I mean, if you really believe in your heart of hearts that marrying more than one person at a time is wrong, it's hard to convince that person to change that position.
To continue with that point, one of the things that, staying with the Sons of the Dragon, Baelor Breakspear. Mm-hmm. And if you know his story, if you don't, look it up. It's beautiful. You're actually going to like Targaryen. But when you see the Sept fall in this last season, one of the things they make sure that you see is Baelor's statue crumble. And for me, that was just a pure highlighting of the fact that the only peacekeeper between the Seven Kingdoms and the Lord's militant, the Faith's militant, was Baelor. He literally made the peace in the land between the religion and the military. Mm-hmm. And you watch the only symbol of that left fall at Cersei's will. So she declares war on all of that while getting her revenge and destroying the symbol of peace between the religion and the Seven Kingdoms simultaneously. That's a heck of a symbol.
And thinking she got the better hand of it. I mean, the quote is, and I was actually just about to bring up this quote, it's a great one. She says, this is a quote from Game of Thrones. It was, what did she care about what Maegor the Cruel had decreed 300 years ago? Instead of taking the swords out of the hands of the faithful, he should have used them for his own ends. She thinks she can manipulate, like she does with everybody, the faith. She's in for a rude awakening on that, and I think that's what is coming. And I think that's a very, very strong symbolism.
Well, I mean, and the other thing to always keep in mind, though, even with Baelor, he was still cray-cray.
Oh, he was super
like
cray-cray.
like he I mean,
Still a Targaryen.
he locked his sister wives in a maiden vault.
They were tempting him.
Yeah. So he was sure. He was great with with working things out with the faith, but like he was horrible with dealing with his own family. It's like Targaryens can never just be kind of good at all these things. Like there's always like this really big catch. Like sure, Maegor is a warrior, but he's also a huge jerk, and like, you know what I mean? Not even just what he did with the Red Keep, but just generally, his life as a whole. He treats his wives like crap. He sets one aside. He kills a whole bunch of them later on. Forces people to marry him. So it's definitely there's always this huge catch with the Targaryens. They can be good at one thing, but then they've got to be really bad at like a whole bunch of other stuff.
And they've gotten through by usually having somebody in the wings or somebody who's assisting them that kind of complements them or allows them to kind of keep through. Like even with Baelor, he had like Aemon the Dragon Knight there helping him out, kind of keeping things, in check. Even Mad King Aerys had folks that were supporting him. Even Barristan and Selmy, could have not gone into Duskendale and rescued his dumb butt, and we would have not had most of what led up to Game of Thrones. But, because he was there and he was the man, that allowed him to go forward, and we saw, Robert's rebellion.
Well, even politically, like, Aerys survived so long because he had Tywin Lannister as his hand.
As well,
yeah.
Yes.
So he was being propped up, like, okay, we've got, like, this guy, he's kind of cray-cray, but because of him, we can rule the kingdom and kind of keep things going for a while. And when his cray-cray gets too much, that's when everything collapses around us.
So unfamiliar. I don't understand what
Yeah. This never happens in
I think
real
this
life.
panel should have been called Targaryens. They're kind of cray-cray.
You can make a note for next time.
Do we have any other questions, thoughts, anybody? 'Cause we're, oh.
Oh, please.
I wanted to ask about so in the book, even after Maegor deals with the high septon situation in Old Town, you still see a lot of the poor fellows popping up all around. And I was wondering if when Westeros gets invaded by Daenerys in the current series, if you think that she'll have like similar problems with like poor fellows popping up, or if you think that just because it hasn't been so long since the Faith reinstated that they armed themselves again, that they won't have as much of a resistance this time around.
It's hard to say, honestly, because we also don't know how Daenerys is going to handle the faith. Like, I don't think she has any love for it, but like she also doesn't. It's not like she practices any other religion.
Do you think she'll bring it back to disarm them again, or they'll keep them armed?
Oh, I think she would probably disarm them. It would be like my kind of off the cuff guess. But I also think that what may kind of come to pass is if her and Jon insist on whatever, if that actually happens in the books and they find out they're related the way they are and they insist on keeping on with it, then there might be those other issues, but like continued issues or repeated issues maybe is the best way to put it. But like at the same time, I don't know if we'll even get that far into the future. Like think about where the books are leaving off now. I highly doubt that there's going to be some stones unturned and some frayed ends that aren't glued together, and I think that we probably won't get too much detail, but I don't really foresee her being okay with there being like the militarized religion.
But you got a hierarchy of needs, and I agree with Tara's analysis completely, but you got a hierarchy of needs, right? Not being killed by the others. pretty high on the list of hierarchy of needs. Your philosophical belief in like marriage kind of lower than that. Starving to death because armies are like pillaging your land and like
Are you saying
bad
that the
stuff.
warrior sons and the poor fellows are going to save Westeros from the White Walkers?
Well, I think it would be
One could
necessary-
hope they'd get involved at some point.
Yeah. I mean, it's either that or die. So. Yeah, but I do think that like Tara said, she would prefer to disarm them. But I think the one thing she has going for her is she has good advisors. She has folks who have been in Westeros, and she's shown that she will listen to them sometimes, which is more than Maegor, who's never. So that's the big difference between the two. She can be talked to and reasoned with, and she can learn, and she's shown that capacity, which is different than some other Targaryens.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. I think we have to focus on like the book Daenerys that we get and where she is in that story, because when she's in Marine, she is listening to people. She is. She's still not making the best decisions, but she's not just stomping around burning everybody with her dragon, because she wants the Iron Throne. And maybe she will eventually, but like one would hope that she's at least smart enough and has learned enough in her short time. I always forget how young she is. That she's not going to Maegor the Cruel it with the Faith. Like maybe she doesn't want them militarized, but maybe she will, work with them, talk with them, versus just eradicating. The way Maegor did.
I don't really think so. It's pretty clear in the books that Daenerys is bad at ruling. She wants to be good at it, and she wants to be a gentle, kind ruler that everybody loves, and she wants to rule a peaceful kingdom. But she's really bad at it. Her skill set is actually conquering people and killing people and taking over things with fire and blood. And that's sort of like her storyline in Dance of Dragons is her realizing, oh, I'm not good at actually sitting on the throne. I'm good at sitting in the saddle with a sword in my hand and having my dragons burn stuff.
I agree that I think definitely Marine has been a learning experience for her.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and hopefully she's gained some insight, some personal insight in that. But I think that to Tara's point, there's a difference between a show of force and just insanity, right? So just recklessly slaughtering people versus, okay, we have to show force to show we're not going to back down. I mean, sort of a Tywin Lannister situation, right? Where you had to, he almost had to deal with the Reynes and the Castameres in that way because it had gotten out of hand. They were laughing at the Lannisters. They didn't take them seriously. They were not paying him back for anything. At that point, his dad was a joke, was, his mistress was like taking his dead wife's clothes and parading around. I mean, it was really a situation where he had to step up and become the leader and make that show of force. So I think Daenerys definitely has to follow that same path, which might look like Maegor at first.
Well, I mean, and here's the problem. Like, we get to see all these histories. We're reading all these histories soon. We'll have, like, the entire Targaryen history. But we have to remember that, like, Daenerys especially, she doesn't know all of these stories. She was raised, essentially, by Viserys with nothing but, like, the positive stuff. And so she does have a lot to learn. And, will she ever read this tale? I mean, what we are reading in Sons of the Dragon is like we said, written by Septon. I thought this one was a Septon, but maybe it is a Maester.
It's a Maester.
It is. I for some reason I thought this one was a Septon, but we like maybe like she will get that text and learn from it, because honestly, especially this one, especially with Maegor's fight with the Faith Militant and everything, that's really important for her storyline if she shows up in Westeros and they are still armed, the way Cersei has armed them. So do you guys have anything else you wanted to say? Because we're at the wrap up time in like a minute or so. I just want to. Anything else?
No?
I hope to see everybody at some of the other Game of Thrones panels this week, and especially at the Game of Thrones party tomorrow at 10 o'clock.
Also, so we've got There Must Always Be a Stark at DragonCon. It's tomorrow in here at 5:30. Then there's the North Remembers How to Party tomorrow night at 10 at the Hilton Grand East. And then Sunday is Looney Theories, Game of Thrones. we had a blast with this panel last year. It's at 10 o'clock in this room. We had a blast with this panel last year, but I will say that like there were people lined up outside the room, and people that showed up right at 10 did not get in. I think later a couple people filtered out, and there were people who were able to stand along the back wall. But if you wanna see this ridiculous panel, 10 on Sunday night, definitely get here
It's
a little
pretty
early.
nuts, and it is marked mature for a reason on the app.
Yes.
And it's book and show too, so any questions?
I mean, shoot, if you are waiting in line and need something to listen to or whatever, if you go to my website, which is at geeksaga.com, I have the panel on my website as a podcast episode, so you can like listen to it. It's really ridiculous. And then Monday is White Walkers, Wargs, and Weirwoods in here at 1. And other than that, rate us in the app if you guys enjoyed the panel, and if you didn't, maybe don't rate us. And also don't forget the Dragon Con charity literacy action. They're taking book donations, like physical book donations, third floor of the Hilton, and of course they are matching donations up to $100,000. Thank you for listening to Tara Lynn's A Geek Saga podcast. If you like what you heard, please check out my website, ageeksaga.com, or consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/ageeksaga.